This week on Twiat, 5G could be a tough sell. Your existing mobile phone could be a sat phone. And Integris joins us to talk about data leak prevention and how you can become GDPR compliant. Twiat on the set.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is Twiat. This Week in Enterprise Technology, episode 331. Recorded March 1st, 2019. Privacy, protection, and putting it all together.
This episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech is brought to you by Smart Deploy. Smart Deploy allows IT departments to re-image unlimited computer models for one golden image. Search their library for your models and get 15 free licenses with 1 year of support. That's $720 worth of free IT software at smartdeploy.com/enterprise. And by Things Canary. Detect attackers on your network with honeypots that can be deployed in minutes. For 10% off and 60-day money-back guarantee, go to canary.tools/twit and enter the code TWIT in the How Do You Hear About Us box. And by Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage. Wasabi's disruptive cloud storage technology is helping enterprises solve one of their fastest growing issues, data storage. See for yourself with free unlimited storage for a month. Go to wasabi.com, click free trial, and use offer code ENTERPRISE.
Well, hello and welcome to yet another episode of This Week in Enterprise Tech, the finest podcast about enterprise technology in these here parts. No, your eyes and ears do not deceive you. I am not, in fact, Lou Maresca with a different haircut. I'm Curt Franklin. Lou Maresca is on assignment this week doing amazing things with even more amazing people, but that doesn't mean we don't have a fine hour of Twiat for you. Of course, I'm joined by my two amazing co-hosts, and we have a very special guest for you today. We're going to be talking about digital loss prevention, something that is, well, it's not terribly sexy sounding until it saves your bacon, because the things that you own intellectually are still where they're supposed to be. Before we get to that, though, I do want to bring in my co-host, starting with the Geek in Paradise, my brother from another mother, Mr. Brian Chee out in Honolulu. Brian, how are things out in Paradise?
It's all going fine and dandy, a little on the wet side, which is causing yet more of the mountain to slide, but my Department of Transportation is working on it, and traffic is finally starting to get a little closer to normal.
I've seen some of the pictures, and I'm glad that you're not in any of that. And coming to us from a slightly less tropical paradise is Heather Mo Williams. Heather, how are things in the Republic of Texas?
Well, I have to admit, they are bitterly cold, or as we say, stupid cold down here. So I'm bundled up in my jacket again, and it's actually too cold to let the dogs out. So I may have to mute myself occasionally when they let their displeasure be known. Well,
we'll see if we can't keep the puppies entertained and all of our listeners as well. To do that, let's get started on the blips. Hey, remember way back in 2018? That was the year when more than 22,000 vulnerabilities were disclosed, and 27% of those were never patched. A new report from Risk-Based Security shows that a total of 22,022 security vulnerabilities were disclosed in 2018. The number is projected to increase substantially once vulnerabilities that were disclosed after the report was compiled are added to the total. And just to give you a sense of what that means, the 2017 report, well, they added well over 2,000 additional vulnerabilities after the initial report was compiled. The main takeaway for enterprises, well, remain vigilant. As has been the case in recent years, web-related vulnerabilities accounted for nearly half, or 47.9%, of all the reported security flaws in 2018. Input validation vulnerabilities, things like SQL injection errors, cross-site scripting, buffer overflow, command injection, once again accounted for a substantial majority, meaning more than 2/3 of the disclosed bugs in 2018. This suggests that after all these years, developers are still struggling to address an issue that's topped the list of top 10 vulnerabilities for a long, long time. Significantly, RBS report shows that organizations relying solely on the CVE and National Vulnerability Database for their vulnerability information are missing a substantial number of bugs. In total, RBS had 6,780 more vulnerabilities in its database than did the NVD. And of that number, almost 46% had a severity rating of 7 or higher.
When you play the Game of Thrones, you win or you die. The U.S. Department of Justice has unsealed espionage-related charges against a former U.S. Air Force service member who helped Iranian hackers target her former colleagues. An arrest warrant was issued for Monica Witt, and indictments were announced for 4 Iranian hackers who supposedly carried out the cyber attacks acting on information provided by Witt. One of the 4 Iranian hackers was also charged in November 2017 with hacking HBO, stealing scripts for unaired episodes of Season 6 of Game of Thrones, and later attempting to extort HBO execs for $6 million. He's believed to be a member of the Charming Kitten Iranian cyber espionage unit and a close collaborator with the country's main intelligence service. Witt, who defected to Iran in 2013, is a former U.S. Air Force counterintelligence special agent and specialized in Middle East operations. The DOJ claims that she began working with Iranian hacking units after attending a conference there in 2012, and she worked to craft and fine-tune cyber operations against her former Air Force colleagues, including spear phishing campaigns, malware infections, and social media-based operations by registering an imposter Facebook account in the name of a former colleague and successfully befriending other special agents. The collaboration with Iranian hackers is made much worse because she not only had high-level security clearance, but also field duty experience, and this helped Iranian intelligence gain better insight into how U.S. operations are conducted both internally and overseas.
You know what? 5G might be a tougher sell than you'd think in 2019. So while the avalanche of announcements may have made it seem otherwise, this last Monday officially marks the first day of Mobile World Congress 2019, and aside from all the ambitious, weird, and sophisticated new handsets on display at the show, without a doubt, the big topic for the show is 5G. 5G is supposed to mark the 5th generation of mobile communications, and with it, tech companies have been making lofty promises about what cell networks could offer in the not-too-distant future. We're talking about mobile data speeds potentially in excess of 1 gig per second, latency of less than 5 to 10 milliseconds, and networks robust enough to handle the quickly growing number of IoT devices. Yeah. So anyway, the article goes on a bit on warning about getting too excited, but I'd like to point out that 5G demands much smaller cells, and that the higher density is going to be a problem in that carriers are going to be saddled with a whole lot more high-speed backhauls than what they're used to for the LTE days. Interestingly enough, I just got reminded that carriers like Charter Spectrum and AT&T are playing some interesting games with actually hanging access points or cells from the actual backhaul lines between the poles. I'm hearing rumors that one carrier is tinkering with putting things like LoRa gateways mid-cable as a practice and potentially opening up some new IoT markets. Makes you go,
A who says that school days are boring? Academic researchers have built a framework for persistent browser-based botnets. Academic researchers have created a new framework dubbed Marionet that allows an attacker to control a victim's browser and all of its resources. The researchers devised a framework using HTML5 for building persistent malicious networks on a browser-based foundation, which they detailed in a paper presented at the Network and Distributed Systems Security Symposium 2019. The paper points out that the power of malware that uses HTML5 and other browser-based software as an attack component stems from the fact that, by default, web applications are understood to be trusted and can run client-side JavaScript code with no natural limitations. Marionette is a three-step system involving components the researchers call the distributor, the servant, and the puppeteer. And it is these three components and persistence they enable that make Marionette something new. Once the infection's in place, the attack can take many forms, including DDoS traffic engines and crypto miners, credential skimmers, and banking remote access Trojans. Marionette is an evolution of the threat possible through HTML5. Now, while there's been a growing trend of malware built on HTML5, turning the browser itself into an attack surface is something new and entirely unwelcome.
And on the lighter side, African internet connectivity gets a Mobile World Congress boost. Mobile World Congress is wrapped in Barcelona, and the internet is awash with stories of cool new devices and even discussion about past announcements that never bore fruition. And there have been several articles about the still all too common phenomenon of tech conferences having few women outside of the so-called booth babes. But in keeping with my New Year's resolution to look for the positive, we're going to talk about what this Mobile World Congress means for Africa and their internet connectivity. And it's all positive news. Announcements this week include Africa's first live 5G network in South Africa, the world's first 400 gig backbone network in Kenya, and a 750-kilometer fiber optic network in 2 Nigerian states. Facebook is among those helping expand internet across Africa through its Facebook Connectivity division. And this new 750-kilometer open access fiber deployment will bring connectivity to 1 million people. Safaricom, the largest cellular operator in sub-Saharan Africa, is rolling out the world's first commercial deployment of a 400 gig backbone network. The demand for backbone capacity has been growing from their current 100 gig network, and a cost analysis showed that increasing to 200 gig or 400 gig would cost the same. So for the same investment, they get twice the capacity. It works out cheaper on a cost per bit basis because you get more, you get to carry more for less. And having one 400 gig network instead of multiples of 100 gig or 200 gig means there's less fiber to light up, and it simplifies the routing of traffic. Earlier in the week, South Africa's newest network, Rain, which offers data-only SIM cards, said it will launch the country's first live 5G network. In a country that has incredibly high mobile data costs, Rain has become a disruptive force in South Africa. It operates in all of the major and metropolitan areas with 3,000 towers and plans to expand to over 5,000 in the next 2 years. And I can't help but end with, I love the rains down in Africa.
Oh, boo. Okay, so Ubiquilink says that there's a possibility that every phone currently in your pocket can be a satellite phone. So utilizing a constellation of satellites in low Earth orbit, Ubiquilink claimed during a briefing at Mobile World Congress in Barcelona that pretty much any phone from the last decade should be able to text and do other low bandwidth tasks from anywhere, even in the middle of the ocean or deep in the Himalayas. Literally anywhere and any time. But not right now. The issue, he explained, isn't really that the phone lacks power. The limits of reception in wireless networks are defined much more by architecture and geology than plain physics. When an RF transmitter, even a tiny one, has a clear shot straight up, it can travel very, very far indeed. Okay, so this great article by Devin Coldway of TechCrunch highlights an rarely recognized fact that even low-power RF signals can go a very, very long way if nothing is in the way. So what the article documents is a test by Ubiquilink and some NASA engineers that were at first saying, no way, and then proceeded to do a 2G test to low Earth orbit. It seems, other than some small modifications to timing, as said by this comment from Ubiquilink, quote, after my guys came back and told me they'd done this, I said, well, let's go validate it, he said. We went to NASA and JPL and asked what they thought. everybody's gut reaction was, well, this won't work. But then afterwards, they just said, well, it works. The big issue identified by this project were lower the orbit. In fact, the SpaceX Starlink system is already in the orbit they're suggesting. Narrow the beam of the RF signal to make more efficient use of the RF energy. 3, lengthen the wavelength to let physics help you for wave propagation. The bottom line is that without having to radically change the hardware, it's possible, without inventing new technologies, that we might actually get the Star Trek communicator sooner than later.
Hey, are you looking for cyber danger? Well, you should look no farther than the IoT, APIs, and vast networks of criminal bots. This week saw a flurry of research reports released ahead of next week's RSA conference, and 2 of them from NetScout and Akamai painted slightly different but uniformly worrying pictures of the cyber threat landscape. NetScout focused on the large organizations conducting criminal activities for nation states or criminal syndicates. According to a NetScout intelligence manager I talked to 2 years ago, there were maybe 35 or 40 such groups around the world. Now, NetScout's researchers are actively tracking at least 35 groups, and they know of at least 170 more around the globe. And the groups are increasingly using all-in-one bots that can be leased to a series of users for spam generation, DDoS attacks, credential stuffing, or pretty much any other purpose. Both reports point out the vulnerability of IoT devices for recruitment into these botnets, and Akamai points to data from its own network to show that API traffic, that's machine-to-machine traffic that a human had no hand in, now accounts for 83% of the data it sees on its network. Well, those are the blips, and we've got some great bites ahead, but, well, I know that you're missing the calm, reassuring voice of Lou Maresca. And to let you experience those dulcet tones, we're going to let him tell you about the first of this week's great sponsors.
Well, thanks, guys. Before we get back to all the Twite goodness over there, let's go ahead and thank a great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is Smart Deploy. Now, if you've been in the tech industry for a while, the IT business, you've likely heard of that golden image. That golden thing actually promised that you could deploy machines at a rapid pace by using a snapshot of a pre-configured machine, but it turns out it wasn't that easy. Well, that's where Smart Deploy jumps in and saves the day. Not only does Smart Deploy offer one-click user data migration for simplified migrations, but also for zero-touch network deployment, imaging over the internet, and application deployment to make your project stress-free. What I found to be true is it doesn't matter whether you have a 50 or 50,000 computers at your company, Smart Deploy is going to make your deployment easy. Now, how do they do that, you might ask? Well, they have a patented device driver injection technology combined with technician-built driver packages called platform packs. They actually evolved the golden image in order to make your organization's life a lot easier. They have over 1,200 platform packs, including ones for Lenovo, HP, Dell, and all of the other major OEMs. Plus, when you need a new model supported, download the golden image to any business class computer and get started. Now, Smart Deploy is the most reliable, easy-to-use solution that has been trusted to deploy over 2.2 million endpoints. It's the first and only solution to offer imaging over Wi-Fi, meaning that you can now manage your remote users in satellite offices without being connected to the same network. That's pretty cool. Now, deploy images, apps, updated drivers to your endpoints via cloud using Dropbox, Google Drive, OneDrive, or OneDrive for Business cloud storage. Step-by-step wizards will provide you and guide you through the process and complicated steps like sysprep and handle all of it for you automatically. Include an answer file to automate tasks like domain joining and computer naming for hands-free, zero-touch deployment. No ramp-up or training necessary. Migrate hundreds of computers to Windows 10 in under an hour with out-of-the-box multicast support. Now, their Seattle-based support team is made up of imaging and Windows experts, and they're just an email or a phone call away. Companies like Nintendo, UCLA, Nissan turned to Smart Deploy to make the dreaded task of computer imaging a bit less painful for you and your organization. And right now, Smart Deploy is giving our audience 15 free licenses with 1 year of support. That's $720 worth of free IT software at smartdeploy.com/enterprise. If you work at a company with 50 to 50,000 computers, head to smartdeploy.com/enterprise to get 15 free licenses with 1 year of support. And we thank Smart Deploy for their support in This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now back to you guys.
Thanks, Lou. We'll talk to you again in a little while. But before we do, we've got some bites. And the first one is a story that has gotten some real attention for Microsoft and more than a little attention within Microsoft. And that's the company's $480 million contract to supply HoloLens technology to the military. Now, a growing number of Microsoft employees say that they feel that this military project crosses a line of some sort, but CEO Satya Nadella says that Microsoft will sell war tech to democracies to, in his words, protect freedoms. Now, Satya Nadella says that Microsoft's $480 million contract to supply this technology to the military is a principled decision, and that the company will not withhold technology from democratic governments. The deal, which was signed in 2018, could see Microsoft supplying as many as 100,000 HoloLens headsets to the military as part of its Integrated Visual Augmentation System, or IVAS project. The intent is to integrate the HoloLens hardware with thermal imaging, weapons targeting, and health monitoring systems to, among other things, provide increased lethality of the soldiers using it. Now, it should be noted that increased lethality is the goal of, well, many of the projects that the military engages in. It's just part of what they do. However, a number of Microsoft employees have signed an open letter saying that the company should cancel the contract, arguing that they have crossed the line into active weapons development. Some 250 staff members are said to have signed the letter. Now, when he spoke to CNN Business, Nadella defended the decision to enter the contract, saying, quote, "We made a principled decision that we're not going to withhold technology from institutions that we have elected in democracy to protect the freedoms we enjoy," end quote. He added, quote, "We were very transparent about that decision and will continue to have that dialogue with employees," end quote. Microsoft selling software to the military is nothing new. The U.S. Department of Defense is a large organization with all the standard productivity requirements that any large organization will have, Windows and other Microsoft software, just like a civilian organization might. But Microsoft software is also found in weapon systems and other areas that are exclusive to the military. Both Windows and Linux have been used in this capacity, with commodity software used to run critical command systems. The employees behind the open letter say that even with the contracts, Microsoft itself was never engaged in weapons development. It was selling general purpose software that others then used and adapted. Now, this is an old argument that employees and owners at many, many companies have. However, the IVAS contract is perceived to be different, with Microsoft, rather than the third parties, working to increase battlefield effectiveness, and here's that word again, lethality. The employees also criticized the company's review process for ethical development in selling machine learning systems, claiming it is opaque and inadequate to prevent weapons development. Now, in the wake of a decision made last year in a different form, because it involved immigration and customs enforcement, Microsoft Chief Legal Officer Brad Smith wrote that any employees felt unable or unwilling to work on certain projects would be assisted in finding alternative roles within the company. Now, I want to turn to my co-host. And Brian, I'll go to you first. This is something that you have a bit of experience with, don't you?
Yeah, I was actually writing code for basically surface to surface missiles. It was strictly a defensive system. And when the corporation shifted to a new program that were specifically offensive, I and several other employees chose to seek employment elsewhere. And to the Microsoft staff, your corporation is offering to shift you into a different division that is not directly involved with this. And while I applaud your willingness to speak up, I should point out that the corporation does what the corporation thinks is best for the corporation. And they're giving you a choice to move. If you don't like working on weapon systems, you have the choice to move. It's going to be done no matter what. AR systems, VR systems are going to happen. I, for one, would rather see those weapon systems using a U.S. written system, a U.S. produced set of hardware, than having the ability for someone to potentially sneak something in the back door during the manufacturing or update process. So I do applaud Satya Nadella's position, and I do kind of tell people you can always change jobs.
Well, you know, that's true. That's an option that many people have. Some may not, but many people do. And I'll admit that many years ago, when I was getting started in the industry, as a matter of fact, my first master's level research project was working on a compiler that was intended to be used in weapon systems. That was a big part of its design statement. And you get to decide, you know, are you comfortable with this or not? Many engineers who work on components that may be used in weapon system will say that if they're not actually designing the payload, if they're not in fact pulling the trigger, that it's not their job to decide on the morality of how their technology will be used. Now, Mo, I want to turn to you because you work on networks, and networks can carry traffic of all sorts. Is this the kind of argument that you and your fellow network engineers ever find yourself having?
Well, to be honest, I don't think that I've ever thought about it like that. Certainly, having worked for some large behemoth companies like Nortel, you never. It's really hard to see all of the moving pieces. So you have to figure that if you're at a company like Microsoft or the big companies, for heaven's sake, even Walmart, that there's going to be actions that the corporation is going to take that you personally would not agree with. I think that you have to at some point divorce yourself from being able. At what point do you get to inflict your moral code? And as Chee pointed out, the corporation is going to act in the corporation's own best interest. I think that it's an incredibly complicated thing, and and you're right. Some people do have the ability to vote with their feet and leave. Not everyone is as fortunate or has those kinds of options. I think that as a network engineer and some of the networks that I've worked on, I certainly have thought about the fact that I may be helping enable bad actors. I'm thinking particularly of the Black Hat network. Because I'm actually making part of the network work that they're using in the trainings, but you can't you can't have a good offense without a good defense, and so I think that it's just incredibly difficult. I think that you don't have as much freedoms. I know this is a democracy, but a lot of people don't realize that when you step foot into your office or even into the parking lot, you've lost quite a few rights. You don't have the right to have a political bumper sticker if your company on your car. If the company tells you to remove it, they have the right to fire you. It's been upheld that they can get rid of you if you're a cigarette smoker because they don't want to have to provide health insurance. So I think that while I appreciate their thought process, and I entirely agree with Chee that I would much rather have our military and law enforcement using American-developed software and hardware rather than I think that we have enough of a supply chain problem from outside the U.S.
It is an interesting problem. It's the sort of thing that I applaud what Microsoft has said about helping people find new jobs. And I also applaud Microsoft employees and the company for engaging in the conversation. Now, while we can come down on either side of this, I think it's right and proper to have the conversation. Let's do it intentionally, one way or the other, rather than simply stumbling along until all of a sudden we find that we have somehow enabled something that we would rather not enable.
Yeah,
this is the
actually.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Curtis.
Mo.
I was just to put this in perspective. I remember I took a variety of weird classes in college, and one of them was about organized crime. And I remember a professor saying, if you have bought cheese, you have put money in the pockets of organized crime. And it has nothing to do with cheeses. The cheese industry is not overrun with organized crime. It's just that pervasive. There is almost no way for you to do anything or work for any company that there's a component of it that's not going to conflict with at least or give you pause come Sunday morning.
A very, very good point. And we're going to end it on that point, not because we don't have more to talk about, but because we have a great guest. But before we get to that great guest, I'm missing those dulcet tones of Lou Maresca. And I think that we have another sponsor that he wants to tell you about right now.
Well, thanks, guys. We'll get back to Twilight in just a moment. Before we actually have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that is Canary. Now, we know that all hackers take the path of least resistance. I always say that your organization's really only secure as its weakest link. Well, what's your weakest link? Well, your users, of course. And in fact, being on that assume breach mindset, your organization will be better off because it takes an average of 191 days for a company to realize there's been a data breach. There's an increasing number of data breaches each year, and it's time to go on the defense. That's where Thinks Canary steps in. These honeypot appliances are super cool. You spread out a couple of these devices on your network, and when there's a data breach, you will be alerted immediately. Back in the early 2000s, people talked about using honeypots, but they weren't easy to deploy and use. Canary has made this simple with zero administration and management overhead. Canary can be set up in under 4 minutes. Within minutes of configuration, with your Canary will look identical to a router, to a switch, to a NAS server, or a Linux box, or a Windows server. Attackers can't tell the difference. Now, the company behind Canaries has been fighting back in the security game for 2 decades, training companies, militaries, and governments on how to break into networks, and they've used the experience to build Canary. Now, you might think, oh, well, these hackers are going to know these things are honeypots and stay away from them. Not at all. Thinks Canaries, they look like normal vulnerabilities on your network, just like any other server or device out there. And they can fake files on them or even enroll in Active Directory. These devices add extreme value to fight against security breaches. Not only are they great value, but they're also licensed annually. And if they break down during that, Thinks will replace them as well. Now, since they're priced well, you can start with a few and scale them up over time. Now, some of the largest organizations in the world use Canaries on their network. I think it's time you get that value too. Don't end up on this year's list of top 10 data breaches. Visit canary.tools/twit for just $7,500 per year, and you get 5 Canaries, your own hosted console, upgrades, support, and maintenance for a full year. And we have a special offer for our audience. Use code TWIT in How Did You Hear About Us box to get 10% off the price for life. We're sure you'll love the Thinks Canary, but if you're not happy, you can always return the Canaries with their 2-month money-back guarantee for a full refund. That's canary.tools/twit and enter the code TWIT in the How Did You Hear About Us box. And we thank Canary for their support of This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now back to you guys.
Thanks, Lou. We appreciate you coming to us from afar. Now, coming to us from slightly less afar is our guest, Raghu Gollamudi, who is co-founder and chief technology officer at Integris. Now, Integris is a technology solution that identifies and tags personal and private data across any system, data storage technology, or infrastructure. Now, this is a help when companies are trying to manage their obligations, assess their risks, and take actions based on those assessments. Integris is used by an awful lot of companies, ranging from SAP Concur. If you haven't dealt with Concur, they're big in the expense management field, law firms like Perkins Coie, and financial companies. Now, it's important to do this because with all of the regulations, with all of the liability, it's critical that an organization know which information belongs to the organization, which belongs to its customers, which belongs to its employees. It's important to know which information you have to go to the mat to protect and which you can be slightly more laissez-faire about it. Integris delivers an accurate accounting of suspected private data of any type, whether that's personally identifiable information, customer credit cards, or intellectual property like trade secrets. The scalability means that companies can scan data in motion to keep data that should be private from becoming exposed, and it's technically flexible. It will plug and play into pretty much any data center or back-end technology. Now, I want to talk, Raghu, about what it is that this technology looks like when it's in use. Now, it's one thing to describe it in these terms, but if I'm in a company, how would I know that I'm using this? What would it do for me that's tangible?
Good afternoon, Curt, and it's a very good question. So the way Integris works is most of our customer data sits within their enterprise firewall environment. And so we have to be deployed within their enterprise firewall environment. And what it means is we should be agnostic of what kind of infrastructure they have. So we use Docker and we use Kubernetes for that whole deployment process. So Kubernetes is our orchestration layer. So once we deploy our product on top of Kubernetes, so we have all these containers running like microservices, and our customer or one of our support agents, they would configure the product to connect to different various data sources that they have. And you've done a fantastic job explaining what kind of data sources we connect to and what we do. So let's assume that we connect to Oracle data source and we extract data from Oracle, and then we look into the schema, we look into the actual data that is residing in Oracle, and we have a sophisticated ML algorithm that says whether that particular data point is credit cards, as you mentioned, or it is personable identifiable information, or is it derived information like I might find a word called halal, which is for preferences, and from there I can derive religion. So once we have all these attribution for those data points, we aggregate it, and then we have a beautiful dashboard where we display those aggregated results. And on top of it, you said you use the word obligations. So obligations are rules like GDPR or California Privacy Act. So we apply those obligations on this metadata that we generated by scanning or discovering those systems, and we see where the violations are. For instance, let's say that our system scanned one of the sources and we found credit card information, and we found 3,000 occurrences of that credit card number, of that credit card information. Then a couple of violations will immediately trigger. One is encryption algorithm or encryption violation, saying that this particular highly sensitive data point should have been encrypted and it was not, and hence Integris was able to find it. So go encrypt it. So you'll see violations created, and those violations are actionable. So what it means is a violation gets triggered or gets assigned to a particular user. In this case, since it's data-related problem, usually a developer or a team or an engineering team will get assigned to that particular ticket, and they would go ahead and figure out how a part of their SDLC process, they need to go and fix that issue so that the consuming applications don't break just because we went and encrypted their data.
Okay, now I've got to ask a question based on that last thing that you said. If the reliance on Docker and Kubernetes weren't enough, when you're talking about assigning these things to developers, is your product required to be part of a DevOps or DevSecOps methodology, or can organizations who are in various levels of the move to Agile or DevOps make use of your technology?
So that's a fantastic question again. So DevOps is more of a process in place of how do I promote a specific kind of development methodology. In this case, let's say I have an agile method, then I need to have from the place of how I'm tracking my features, let's assume it's Jira. You might have user stories created in Jira, and you might have tasks assigned to the user story. Now, developers are working on that. So the key thing that needs to happen in that front there, in that process, is we need to have privacy-related tasks out of that particular template. So, for instance, let's say that I'm creating a user management feature or a form. That means when I create that user story, I should see privacy-related task assigned there, saying that make sure that the password is encrypted, or make sure the password is stored in Vault, which is like a highly secured storage. So those kind of processes in place for better privacy protection of data is critical. So that's one piece. Other side of DevOps is once I check in the code, what happens? How do I maintain my source control? How do I make sure that there's no sensitive information in my source code? I can have potentially username and password in the source code. That's where Integris will come and help. We can connect to any kind of structured or unstructured sources, and we can look for potentially damaging information in those endpoints, and we can tell what needs to be fixed. But we don't go and fix the data, because if you fix it, then all the consuming production applications can potentially break. So we help in identifying and coming up with a data map telling where all your data assets are and how much of those data assets contain personally identifiable or sensitive information.
Very good. Well, I appreciate that, and I'm sure we're going to be coming back to some of those issues. But before we do, I want to loop back a little bit and ask how it is that you came to be the co-founder of a company doing this. I mean, protecting data is not by itself a unique idea. What made you decide that this approach was the one that you wanted to bring to market, and how did you make that happen?
Yeah, so it's a twofold answer. So initially, I was working at Microsoft for 10 years, and I always had this itch to be part of a startup. And my boss at Microsoft quit, and he started his company, Shippable. And I joined him as a CTO at Shippable, which is a DevOps company. And after that, I broke my foot and I was bedridden. And I decided that I'm not doing a service to my company by not working there. So I quit Shippable. And I wanted to do something my own. At that time, I met my founder and CEO, Christina Bergman. And she was very passionate about the data privacy space. And she was a person who went and raised money, seed funding from Madrona and Amplify Ventures. And that's how the company started. And when I heard about what her vision was and what her approach to solving the problem space, that really inspired me. So hence I thought, you know what, I need to be part of this company. I need to start executing on the engineering front, and I need to help her get her vision to reality. And that's how I joined her. And when I joined Integris, I realized the complexity of the space, because as you mentioned, 5G is going to go live. It's going to be 1 GB per second data that's going to come into cloud, or it's going to come into private enterprises infrastructure. So we are actually dealing with big data problem. And now how do we scale and how do we scan this much amount of data and tell how much of that data is sensitive, and how do we have a redaction steps in place to ensure that when data gets stored finally into its destination, it is stored in the right format, in the right way. So that's what really enticed me, and that challenge actually brought me in. And hence we built Integris software, which is a highly scalable system which scales elastically up and down depending upon the data volume. And as I said, we connect to streaming sources like Kafka or Kinesis, where data hose pipes are coming in with a lot of data, and Integris can go intercept it, scan it, and tell exactly what we find so that the downstream system can take corrective actions like your security tools for encryption or for redaction or deletion of data. So that's my story of why I joined Integris.
And it is a great story, and we have a lot of questions we want to continue to ask, and my co-hosts want to join in. But before we do, well, I just can't get enough of Lou's voice. So we've got one more sponsor that he wants to tell you about, and I'm going to let him do it right now.
Thanks, guys. Before we get back to you, I have to thank another great sponsor of This Week in Enterprise Tech, and that's Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage. Now, I have used Wasabi, and they are just awesome. You might have saying that cloud storage is expensive. The more you store in it, the more times you perform operations on and access it. Well, in this day and age, that's the truth for most cloud storage companies. And nowadays, cloud storage companies try to stay pretty lucrative by actually lowering their storage fees for that ingress and egress fees. Well, now from experience, I can tell you, if you try and go on a cheaper cloud storage system, you also give up on performance and reliability as well. Well, that's where Wasabi Hot Cloud Storage has blown your mind here. And they're going to go ahead and show you how well it is. You can, if you're doing a small project or a big project, all the way up from enterprise projects, Wasabi seems to have figured it all out. Now listen to this cost, $4.99 per terabyte per month. Plus, listen to this game changer. Unlimited free egress fees, free for your egress for your data at no charge, and no charge for API calls, so you don't have to pay for actually accessing your data as well. Now go check it out right now, what you're already paying on cloud storage, because I can tell you right now that not having to include egress fees and API calls for those CRUD operations will substantially save you a chunk of money, and also that cost of doing business. Now you're probably thinking, well, if they're cheaper, they must be slower, or they don't actually have all those features and bells and whistles, right? Well, Wasabi has developed some disruptive technology. They found ways to pull raw performance out of their storage devices without compromises. They have a revolutionary process that lays down data on disks sequentially as opposed to in blocks. What happens? Well, that means Wasabi's storage is 80% cheaper and 6 times faster in speed than the industry leaders. Now, are you and your organization worried about compliance? Well, Wasabi is HIPAA, FINRA, and CJS compliant as well. Now, fast, cheap storage isn't worth much if your data isn't secure. Well, Wasabi also has the answer here. Wasabi offers a unique feature of immutable buckets that cannot be deleted or altered, protecting your valuable data from accidental or malicious destruction. Now, if you can find another service that's doing that today, then I don't think you're going to be able to find it, because they also have a 90-day rotating integrity checks on your data, as well as 11 nines of durability. Are you worried about data migration? Well, Wasabi has that answer as well with their Wasabi Ball Transfer Appliance. This thing is powered by Netgear and is designed to transfer large data sets while dynamically reducing your costs. Now, you might already have cloud storage, or your organization's tried to store data on premise to save money or wants to move partially to the cloud. With Wasabi, it will have you rethinking those approaches. I bet you want to try this out right now, right? Well, go build something fun and get moving your data right now. Experience Wasabi for yourself with free, unlimited storage for a month. Go to wasabi.com, click the free trial link, and enter the code ENTERPRISE. See how much storing in the cloud can save your business. That's wasabi.com, and enter the code ENTERPRISE. And we thank Wasabi for their support in This Week in Enterprise Tech. Now back to you guys.
Thanks, Lou. We appreciate hearing from you and look forward to having you back in our midst very soon. Well, we're here with Raghu Gollamudi, co-founder and CTO at Integris, and we have more questions as we talk to him about DLP. And the first of those, I want to bring in my co-host, Heather Williams, because, well, she has a question based on a real-world implementation of this protection. Mo, over to you.
Hey, thanks. So a couple of weeks ago on Twiat, we talked about the fact that travel sites, such as the online booking companies like Kayak, and certainly we've heard of the breaches that Marriott and British Air and some of those other guys have suffered. It seems on an ongoing basis. So my question is, and it seems that that the reason they're getting targeted is because they're a target-rich environment, and when it comes to PII, so it's not necessarily that they're after like the one hit of getting a credit card. It's all of the other stuff that they can get about you that makes it a really scrapable amount of data, your birthday and all of the other stuff that you frankly can't change. It's getting pretty common to just ditch a credit card because there's been a breach that happens. But for instance, short of going into WITSEC, you're never going to get another social security number. So I was wondering if you've targeted the travel industry that seems to be having a lot of problems with that, and how Integris would be applied in those cases.
Yeah, so it's again, Mo, is a very good question. So if you look at it, the breaches are happening because of security issues, in the sense like the system is not secure enough and some rogue actor is able to either alias it or anonymize it and get into that system and be able to get the data. And the way we look at it is that privacy and security are two faces of the same coin. So what it means is that privacy is much more downstream than security. So first, we need to identify what data needs to be protected, and then come up with practices in place, which might be security practices or encryption practices or what it may be in place to secure the data, to make sure that to make sure that the access to data is restricted. So that is the whole end-to-end part, and that's what we look at it. And the way we do that is, now let's assume that we have a travel company. Let's assume that we are installing one of the travel companies. So what we do is, as a stream of data is flowing in, that's called data in motion. So as a stream of data is flowing in, we can look at the data and we can tell what data points together constitute a PI information. That means that, for instance, you can have first name, zip code, and date of birth. If you have these three attributes together, you can 90% accurately identify individuals in the United States. So what we do is we have those kind of combinations in our system, and we look for those patterns, and then we stamp those 3 data points and say that these 3 needs to be anonymized. So that once it's stored into the final storage system and you have decent security practices in place to protect it, in case that data set gets breached, the usefulness of that data set reduces effectively. So it's not as effective for the hackers to use the data compared to the current instance where everything is stored in a raw format and they're able to link stuff and make use of it. So that's what our tool is used for and is helpful, where you can create, depending upon what the current situations are and conditions are, you can decide that these 5 attributes, and those things keep changing depending upon the technology. So it might be that an IP address with a 4-digit decimal precision is much more identifiable than a lat long with a 4-digit decimal precision is much more identifiable than a lat long without any precision. So those are things where Integris can come and help and look for and tell how that information needs to be dealt with and how it needs to get stored, so that in case a breach happens, it's still, the impact is not that much.
Okay, my turn. So I'm a small to medium sized corporation, and I'm thinking, wow, this sounds pretty good. I've got some GDPR issues because I do business in the UK. What kinds of things can I do to get prepped before I start calling your sales group? So first thing, what you need to know is what sources are there in your ecosystem. Like, where are all the data is residing? Sometimes you might find data residing in Google Drives. It might be, and you might have a productional system like Oracle or MySQL, or you might have Hadoop. So first, getting an inventory of all your data sources is very critical. So once you have that, next is identifying which customers that you're dealing with. Are your customers contractors? Are they your employees? So what different customers profiles you have? Because you have employee data too, and employee data is also subjected to GDPR.
And employee data is much more nuclear than your customer data because you have all information about your employee, including health, PHI information. So it's very critical to understand what different kinds of in GDPR they call it data subjects. What different kind of data subjects information you're storing in your ecosystem, and then once you have those two things and how we're using it, in the sense like you might have a marketing department using a subset of data for email marketing purposes, or you might have an ML engineering team using that data to figure out how to target particular ads or how to come up with product recommendation. So understanding the use of that data is very critical. So once you have these data points compiled, then Integris, you can use Integris. Integris can come in, you can ingest, or you can set up our software by mentioning all those metadata points, and then Integris will blaze through your data, figure out where the issues are, and exactly this is what you're thinking, the way you're using it, but this is what we actually found of how the data is getting used and how the data is getting stored. And we can show the discrepancies, and you can go and fix your data within your organization.
Well, Raghu, we appreciate all of the answers you've given to some fairly specific questions. So if someone is interested in Integris, how should they get in touch with you? Is there a website? Is there email? Should they send you a direct message on Twitter? What is their first step to get in touch with you to continue the conversation?
Curt, it's all of the above. So we have a beautiful website with contact information on how you can reach out to us and ask for more information on what we do. And also you can reach out to me through my Twitter handle. And our sales team is excellent. So we have Nick Brandt, who's the VP of sales, and he is amazing in reaching out and also responding to a customer request. So answer is all of the above. And we have a great team to support that.
Well, outstanding. We really appreciate you being with us. And you mentioned your Twitter handle. Are you blogging anywhere? You want to tell anybody about your Twitter stream, or where they can find your thoughts on all this?
Yeah, so my Twitter handle is rags_Dan, and that's where I tweet all my things and what is happening with respect to the privacy space. And you can see my CEO is more active on Twitter and blogging, so you'll see her profile there. And my goal is to also start getting into this role. I'm not much of a media person, and now, I'm the CTO, so I'm going to be doing that more often and much more.
Very good. Well, Raghu Gollamudi, co-founder and CTO of Integris, we're pleased to have had you today as our guest, and we're pleased to have had you as a member of our audience. We're thrilled that you've been with us today, even though you've had to suffer through an hour minus the amazing Lou Maresca. Fortunately, you've been able to listen to my two co-hosts, and we're going to get to them now. Heather Williams, they're deep in the heart of Texas. What are you going to be doing this week, and what should people be aware of in your massive social media presence?
Well, my massive social media presence, I advertised this week that I went in and massively failed a certification exam. So for all of you guys out there worrying about it, it happens all the time, and we're going to call this one recon, and I'm pulling myself up by my bootstraps, and I'm going to, so I think I'm going to be doing a little bit of studying this weekend. Other than that, I'm actually preparing for that brutal flight to Singapore, which is going to be happening in a couple of weeks as I head over for Black Hat Asia to be bringing just awesome Wi-Fi to any and all actors that are going to be attending that event.
Well, I understand we've been writing a bit about Black Hat Singapore over at Dark Reading, so it looks like there are going to be some really exciting sessions over there. And since you're going to be there, we know that the Wi-Fi will be impeccable. And speaking of impeccable, Brian, how about you? What's going on in your part of the world, and what should people be aware of with your writing and social media?
Well, I'll tell you, one of these fine days, I'd really love to be able to make it to Black Hat Singapore, because my Hanai niece is there with her new baby boy, And we'd love to be able to see her. She's actually an architect there. So hello. Anyway, you can find me at Twitter at ADVNETLAB, Advanced Net Lab. And I am also Cheebert at twit.tv. But better yet, why don't you use Twyet at twit.tv, and that email will hit all the hosts. We'd love to hear your ideas for shows. We are talking to several people. I just give one piece of advice. If you're going to volunteer to do a show, make sure your corporate management is okay with this. I do not want to get any of the Twyet Riot in trouble by them speaking out of turn. Some of the larger corporations get a little perturbed if their employees talk and mention that they work for such and such corporation without getting permission of their PR group. So be careful. We want you to be able to be in our chat room and watch us, and we'd love to hear from you for show ideas.
Yeah, absolutely. As for me, I'm getting ready to head to the wonderful, intimate gathering that is the RSA conference, just me and, I don't know, 500,000 security professionals. It's going to be a great show. It's going to be an amazing conference. I have a lot of people that I'm talking to, and I'll be writing about it, Dark Reading. I'll also be tweeting about it, my handle, KG4GWA, and I've started doing more on Instagram, so look for Curt_Franklin. And if you're going to be at the RSA conference and you're a security professional, I have a couple of questions that I'm trying to ask a bunch of people. So shoot me a direct message on my Twitter handle at KG4GWA. Would love to meet up with you in a hallway somewhere or close to a booth, ask you these questions, and get your collective intelligence on what's happening in the world of security. Now, before we go, there is the tradition that we have to ask the amazing question of our astounding technical director. So when it comes to DLP in the context of this show, what does DLP mean?
Oh boy. Can I pass till next week?
I think, given what's been going on in Washington, that the correct phrase is that you are going to yield your time until next week. And
yes,
the chair will accept that yield and come back to you later.
Okay, thanks, Curt.
If you're
sure
part
it's
of
not
our
digital
audience,
light projection?
That's what I was.
Not.
That was the first thing I was going to say.
It is not. In fact, so I'm glad you passed. You have a chance to come back next week and get it right. So we'll let you cogitate on this for just a little while.
Like Mo, I'll be studying.
I was going to say,
go.
that's the second certification exam failed this week.
Yes.
Well, for those of you in the Twyet Riot, we hope that you have no certification fails and that you have spent a profitable hour with us. We hope that you'll be back with us next time because, well, for the best hour in enterprise technology, we want you to come back here and remember, just keep Twyet.